Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may not have prepared you for. As always, I am AJ, and sitting across me, Jason. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing well, AJ. I'm still staying clear of COVID, knock on wood.
I'm not.
So, yeah, that's why I was giving you that opening, man.
I got hit with it last week.
Yeah.
And I'm over it in terms of the COVID itself, but now I just sound like I have bad allergies, which I do. I did wake up this morning with a pretty rough sinus headache, but it's passed now.
Well, good. Well, I'm glad to hear you don't have any of the major effects to it. You were very smart and got inoculated.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I got that, and I mean it wasn't terrible. It was not fun by any stretch of the imagination. I was planning to get a whole lot of work done, and I didn't get much of anything done because I was just sitting around trying to breathe.
Yeah.
But it was not as bad as I guess obviously it could have been.
Oh yeah, and it doesn't sound like you have any of the long COVID symptoms there. You know, even if COVID doesn't hit you that hard in terms of like immediate fevers, you know, that type of thing, the long-term effects on your lungs and things like that, they still don't fully understand, you know, how bad that can be. They've obviously seen how bad some of the cases are, but they don't know how bad it can be for everybody. So that was
the interesting thing, though, for me. I never once had a fever. And that, you know, that's the big one. And I never once had a fever. I checked it pretty regularly just to make sure.
Yeah, well, you know, with the new variants and you know, you've already got to build up an immune system because you've been 2 shots and a booster, right?
Yep.
That, you know, your body's able to handle it now. So that's good. All right.
Well, let's get into today's episode. We are going to be dealing with paying for college, which is probably one of the biggest talking points right now in education is the cost of college.
Yeah.
And so we're going to be discussing kind of how you know, where's the money go, how to pay for it, and all this. So what does that sound like to you?
Sounds good. Yeah, the hot button issue right now. So before we do, remind everybody, go to reschool'd.com. Right. Check out our recent videos, drop us a line, let us know what you want to hear. Check us out on the social media platforms and on your favorite podcasting app, because we need all the stars you'll give us.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into our quick question, and it's a very straightforward question. Again, we like to keep these a little personal. How'd you pay for college?
Well, I was very lucky, right? In terms of when I was in high school, my brother left for college a year ahead of me, and we were the first ones in our family. You know, it's pretty expensive and things like that. Not a lot of extra money going around to be able to pay for it and stuff. And so I applied early, not knowing if I was going to apply anywhere else, and landed a full scholarship, covered housing, books, you know, tuition, everything like that. So I was super fortunate. And then while I was in college, I waited tables and stuff like that for spending money. I didn't wait tables my whole first year, though. I didn't, or do banquet setup or do any of the other things I did to make money. I didn't do any of that. I just focused on academics. But after that first year, I needed to make some money. So, you know, so honestly, I really just needed money to pay for the studies abroad experiences. Right.
Yeah, there you go.
So that was, you know, so I strung together scholarship with working to do it for undergraduate. So it was worked out for me. How about you?
So to pay for my college, in the state of Georgia, we have what's called the Hope Scholarship. So at the time, and I'm pretty sure that the parameters are still roughly the same, but at the time, all you had to have coming out of high school was a 3.0 average. And then you had to maintain it all the way through your college career in order to maintain that scholarship. And it paid for all of your classes and stuff like that. So I had that to pay for my classes and stuff. I've said this before. I think it was on a much earlier episode before, but I was that special kind of stupid in college where I had my college paid for with Hope, but I wanted spending money, so I got student loans. You know, I had to pay the stupid tax, and I did. But you know, I did that for the spending side, and I had a you know, part-time job, but wasn't, you know, I didn't pay much. And then once I started playing sports, it was kind of harder to maintain a job that's going to give me any of that spending money. But, you know, looking back, I did I need that student loan? Absolutely not. I didn't need to do all those trips. Granted, those trips were a lot of fun, but having to pay for all that, and then also I used part of it to pay for. I lived in a house 1 year while I was in college, and my parents lived in the same town, so I moved out of my parents' house 15 minutes away, and I should have saved that money looking back. So
yeah,
I made a lot of stupid choices when I didn't have to take out a student loan. I did, but I was very fortunate, like I said, to get the Hope Scholarship. So
well, sometimes you just do have to stack methods, right? Sometimes, and I think that's what we need to do mostly in this episode. We need to talk about the various things that you're going to have to pay for, but also ways you can go about paying for it.
Yeah.
Right. So
let's get into the main topic. And the first question, I think you were just kind of pointing a little bit out a bit, but why is college so expensive?
That's why it's such a hot button issue, right? The cost of college, particularly at private schools, but even at public universities, has far outpaced, right, other inflationary growth, right? The cost of college has just gone up, up, up. And there's a lot of contributors to that in terms of, it's a little more complex than you can just lay out. We could draw diagrams for a little while about all the cost drivers at a school and the
go ahead and draw a diagram while they're listening to this on the podcast.
Exactly, right? So you can hear what we're talking about. But, like most things, you just have to say, all right, what does it cost to run the college or university? And that's a pretty high cost. And then you say, well, how's it paid for? And obviously, the state government kicks in a portion if it's a public university. There may be federal portions that come in, particularly depending on the demographics and the nature of your university and stuff like that. At private universities, it's entirely paid for with tuition and a combination of prior endowments and how much that earns. Public universities have endowments too. That just means money that people have donated over the years that have built up, and it earns interest because it's invested just like a retirement account would be. So you take the normal public institution, perhaps doesn't have a huge endowment, right? They'll have a little bit of money coming in from whatever donations and stuff, but that's not substantial for most smaller, newer universities, for example. Then you'll have the state portion that they're kicking in. Lots of times states allocate money from things like lotteries or special taxes, things like that, in the state to the institution. And then other than that, they have to do the math and say, look, this is how much everything costs. This is how much money we have coming in. This is the number of students we have. So whatever we fall short on covering all our costs plus a little bit of margin, right? Mm-hmm. They'll just divide that by the number of students and say, this is the minimum amount that we need to charge this year. And then they'll tack in other things like, the fees for technology and things like that. And all that really is separating something out so it doesn't look like it's just part of the tuition, right? So that being said, right, there are a lot of cost drivers to running a school. And we could talk about that for hours about, everything from professor and staff salaries to facilities that pretty extensive, to program budgets, to software programs, and other electronic resources that you pay a recurring fee on, health insurance premiums and programs that students can buy into where the school matches some portion of it. Sports teams, right? I mean, Some schools have sports teams that bring in a lot of money, but most schools have sports teams that cost the school a great deal of money. About the, big schools that have big football teams or male basketball teams bring in money. Pretty much everything else loses massive amounts of money. So that being said, there's just a lot of cost drivers for the school that have to be paid for.
Yeah, and if you look at it from a business, so if you're a business student, currently a business student, or you're planning on being a business student, you will have, or you have already talked about what's called the supply chain. And you can kind of look at it in that sense of a supply chain where you have a bunch of different pieces that's going to cost something for you to add to your school. So like you said, the teacher salaries, the facilities, You can talk about stuff like utility costs. Utility costs are not cheap on campus. I mean, you're talking about a lot of facilities that are running electricity for most, if not all, parts of the day.
Oh, yeah.
And all of these things are contributing factors to the price. And when one of those things increases, or multiple things of those increases, then obviously the cost to the college is going to have to increase, which is then pushed on to either, you said, the government subsidies or the tuition, or some endowments or stuff like that. It's going to have to come out somewhere. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a bunch of those pieces seem to be increasing at an exponential rate. And it's tough. The beauty of it is that, it's still a cost benefit that you're having to go through. So is the cost of the education that you're going for, is it going to reap some kind of return in the end? Mm-hmm. If it's not, then it's probably not a good idea to go that route. If it does, then it is.
Right. We've talked a lot before about personal growth and things like that, and picking the school that's right for you and stuff like that. But you pick the school that's right for you for personal growth and for what you want to achieve career-wise and things like that. But you really do have to do the math and say, look, is there a return on investment? Not just financial, but personal return on investment. That is, I'm going to have a great experience. I'm going to grow as a person. What is that worth to me? Am I willing to live under a certain standard of living, right, based upon the debt or whatever that I have to incur to do it? So it really is it's a calculation where you're not just using numbers, right?
Yeah, it's quantity and quality.
Yeah,
I mean, it's quantitative and qualitative.
To quote, The Office, right? Where the guy who's the accountant, right? The bald guy. It's like, sometimes numbers, they just don't add up. Right?
Yeah, right.
So
Good to hear from an accountant.
But anyway, so you have qualitative factors in there. So it's not a pure math decision in terms of what you're going to make in the future versus what it's going to cost, but that's a huge part of it.
Yeah. And two, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I heard this, and I don't know the exact legality of this. Maybe this is something you're familiar with, but all these places where money comes from, whether it be tuition or federal funding or endowments or anything like that, each of those different areas that they come from can only be used for certain expenses within the college. So like tuition can't be used for something. I don't know the exact. Are you familiar with those?
So I'm slightly familiar with it. And that's normally aspects of so on the nonprofit side, because most academic institutions, particularly ones that have an endowment, are nonprofits. Okay. So they're government entities organized as a corporation that is a nonprofit corporation under whatever section of the IRS tax code that allows them to be nonprofit. So you can donate to them, right? Tax free, right? You're not taxed on what you donate to them. So that's the essence of what that means. But so when you have a nonprofit, there are certain limitations on what you can spend money on that go towards the nonprofit purpose. Right. And only some percentage of it can go to growth in terms of facilities and whatnot. So there's that aspect, right, for the private schools and the public schools that have endowments and stuff. On the state side, states just pass regulations that say, look, these are buckets of money. And this is our, how we're going to run our fiscal policy. We have to allocate a certain amount for maintenance and facilities, and that will be given to the university that says, right, you have to maintain buildings, or you have to build whatever you need to build, or, the HVAC system at a school oftentimes costs $1 million to $2 million, right, for a large HVAC system, that type of thing. Those things take hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of maintenance every few years, right? Mm-hmm. So things like that, you have to maintain your facilities. You have to cut the grass, right? You have to, people don't realize it, but it's thousands of dollars sometimes for a single, day of grass cutting by these professional services company that cut acres worth of grass for you at your university. So anyway, that being said, yes, there are allocations from the state side and from the tax side that limit how you can allocate your funds. For the most part, private colleges, they're only limited in what they spend on by their internal policies and the tax regulations associated with being a nonprofit. So it's kind of voluntary the way they chop it up, but the state fiscal policy stuff is a lot more complicated.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, so we have tuition. So from a student's perspective, you have tuition, and that's pretty much, you can find that in some capacity on the website of the college that you're applying for, and it probably is going to also have some of the other fees maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some specific expenses outside of like tuition that our listeners need to account for going into this? So it's not like a surprise, here's this extra cost that you didn't think about. What are some that we can bring up?
Well, we already did an episode on the cost of books, right?
Yes.
So that's number one. That's a huge thing every semester. You have access to the classroom, to the professor, to the, some of the resources associated with the class and the facilities, obviously. But in order to succeed in that class, there's an expectation that you'll buy supplemental resources like textbooks and things like that, or access to computer programs and things like that.
Yeah, and I was thinking, one of the things that popped in my mind is the cost of, I'm going to call it cost of convenience, because in almost every class, your life is going to be a whole lot easier with a computer.
Mm-hmm.
And even more so, like I said, and depending on how demanding your class is, I use my iPad almost every day, but I also use my computer for different things too. So the technology aspect of it is a significant expense that, students need to be aware of. I'm not saying that you have to purchase a new computer or you have to purchase an iPad or whatever it is, but the convenience that it gives is also a nice thing. And granted, you are going to pay technology fees. All colleges are going to have computers that you can access if you need them. So if you don't have one, you can make do. But it's that convenience of being able to do it from home and doing it at your time versus having to either, I guess you'd say, not rent, but, schedule a time that you can use their computers, or hope that nobody else is on it, or hope that they have the right software or whatever. I think that's one that I don't think many students think about, right, in the early, before you get to college.
Well, you bring up one good point there, technology fees. Every college pretty much charges a separate technology fee from their tuition, and and that's in addition to what you pay for books. And the technology fee normally pays for the electronic resources that you have, such as the learning management system for all classes, the library resources. I'd say that's the majority of it, right? Things like databases where you have access to journals, other, stuff. I don't even know what all.
There's a lot of them. Yeah, I know. I get it.
Through the technology fee, but it's a lot of stuff, and most of it comes through the library.
Another one that just popped in my head, and I mean, I say popped in my head, this is an obvious one, but for a lot of students, it's the room, the board, and the food.
Oh, yeah. That's a substantial
huge one.
Right? Lots of students choose to live off campus, but many schools, at least the first year anyway, require you to live on campus. So that's a necessary expense that you have to account for. The dormitory fees, right? Because they're going to put you in dorms. Then there's meal plans to go along with it. You don't have a kitchen oftentimes where you can fully cook all your meals and stuff. You might have some form of a kitchen, but it's very difficult to cook all your meals with the timing and everything. So most students eat at the only available, very convenient restaurant that serves food continuously throughout the day at all times, type thing. And that's the food hall, right? The cafeteria. So you get a meal plan, or either a full meal plan or some partial meal plan. And then, you supplement on top of that, getting food from other places. But so the food, the room, the board, that adds up really quickly, right?
Yeah, I know. I know my alma mater, UGA, they just came out, and I heard somewhere that if you are an upperclassman, they're offering to pay you to not stay in the dorms because they need those spaces for the incoming freshmen. But so many of them are now staying in the dorms because I guess the convenience side of it, that they're offering to pay you if you go live off campus.
Wow.
I mean, it's not a huge amount. I think I read somewhere it was like $3,000 or $3,500.
That's still pretty substantial.
That's a huge piece, yeah.
For what the difference in cost of living off campus versus on campus is. And that's another thing. If you decide to live off campus and you're not in your hometown, right, where you can live with friends or family or something like that, and you're probably going to have to rent a place, sometimes individually, but usually with others, having roommates and stuff. And that's going to be a substantial expense, right? So room, board, food is going to be a substantial part of going to college, and it's substantial expense for which you need to account.
And another one that I thought of was, and this is one that probably is not going to be at the forefront of most people, because you're thinking, okay, room, board, food, that's kind of, I guess you would say that's pretty common. You got the technology side, you got that's pretty common. But all of us are going to want some kind of entertainment. I mean, there's something, we're not going to be sitting in our dorm or in our house 24 hours a day outside of class. There's going to be something we want to do, and it's going to cost, whether it's something that you're somebody that likes to go out downtown and have fun that way, or somebody that maybe, and we've talked about this in a past episode too, fraternities and sororities, those cost. So these again are just extra costs that you need to be aware of and anticipate before going, so you can prepare.
Yeah. So, luckily the entertainment stuff is largely voluntary, right?
Yes.
But
you can choose.
It is something that helps you develop as a person, right? And it's going to be part of your college experience. It's going to be a lot of cost to account for it. The last one I can really think of that's pretty substantial is everything that surrounds transportation.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So, you may have a car, right? You may not. Most colleges have some system around the campus, a little bus system or something like that, where you can bus back and forth around, parts of the campus and things like that. But when it comes to getting on the campus, if you live off of campus, leaving campus to go out and do other things, there's going to be all sorts of expenses. If you bring a car, parking is usually very expensive. Schools will sell you in their parking decks, parking passes, right? So if you have a class that's on the other side of campus and you're going to drive your car from one class to another, well, you pretty well have to buy a parking pass deck, to that deck where you're going to park. Sometimes that's hundreds of dollars a semester, right? Type scenario. So there's the parking fees. There's the maintenance with stuff. If you go to a college in a bigger city like New York or even Atlanta, type scenario, oftentimes you're going to take public transportation, which you pay for, right, to get on the train, right? You pay that. It's in Atlanta, the MARTA is $2.50 every time you hop on, right? That type of thing. So, a round trip, $5 a day starts to add up. And that's assuming you don't take any interim trips, right, to go places. So you could easily be spending a few $100 a month just on additional transportation costs.
That's true. Yeah.
So,
all right. So we've talked about things that, we need to consider outside the normal tuition and stuff like that.
Oh, AJ, before we jump away, I got to tell you one more.
Okay. Yeah, please.
So things changed with the Affordable Care Act a few years ago, where now students, as long as you are a full-time student, you can stay on your family or parents' health insurance. Lots of times people don't have that option, right? You are no longer a dependent of a parent who has health insurance where they can add you to it and pay the family premium associated with it, right? A lot of us are very lucky where that it was an option for us, right? Our parents had jobs and their jobs had family plan options and they were able to afford to have us on it. But if that's not something you have going for you, health insurance, right?
Yeah,
oftentimes it's offered through the school, okay? But it's a pretty substantial cost every month. As a young student that doesn't have a ton of, a ton of likelihood of suffering high medical expenses, it's not the cost it would be for an older student, right?
Yeah.
Type scenario. But that being said, right, you need to account for that.
Yeah, that's a very good one too. Yeah, I didn't think about that one. What are some options, since we've talked about all these expenses, and if you were to add up all the ones we talked about, it's expensive.
Yeah.
What are some options that our listeners may have in order to pay for these costs?
So I guess let's run down the gamut, I would say, not gauntlet, gamut, of the different methods or means that people oftentimes use. All
right. So I would say I don't know. I couldn't tell I was going to say the least likely. I don't know if this is least likely or most likely or where it is in percentage wise, but the obvious one is pay in cash.
Yeah.
It may not be the easiest one, but it is the obvious one is to pay it in cash.
I would say that is probably one of the least used ones.
I was thinking that too. I wasn't sure though, just because I only know what I see, and I don't know if it's the average or if it's an outlier. But I don't think many people pay fully in cash.
Well,
but that's one obvious.
People finance homes, people finance vehicles, and people finance education.
You can finance pets now.
Yeah, you sure can. You can
It's
finance.
ridiculous.
There is a market to finance just about everything, especially
literally.
At a minimum, if you do it through a credit card, right, or something like that, you're financing, right? So, but there to quote J.P. Morgan, not John, the father, John Pierpont, the first, he said, and this influenced his son a lot, said there are people who understand interest, that is interest on money, right? Paying interest on money that's borrowed. And there are people who pay it. Yeah. Right. And he separated the world into those two. And, debt is a useful thing, right? To help you accomplish things, right? Particularly when the percentage of interest that you pay on the debt is low in comparison to the value that it brings for you. Right. You start to learn a lot of those things in college, right? About if you take business courses, the use of debt financing for things and project value and what the return on it'll be. Right. But at the same time, like we said, it's a strategic calculation as to whether it's worth it to do that. So you identify number one, cash. I'm going to go with number two, student loans. Financing.
And I would argue that's the biggest one.
Right. Yeah, that's the biggest. And student loans really come in two forms. It's public student loans. That is, you get them through the federal government. You fill out what's called the FAFSA form, right? And all that does is identify yourself for eligibility for federal benefits. And then you go to, federal lenders in order to secure the loan. Private loans are just like other loans. They are unsecured loans that are focused on paying for education. Now, education loans, sometimes when I say unsecured, they're oftentimes backed by organizations like the federal government, like the state government, things like that. So if you were to default on it, the private lender would be able to get some of their money back, if not all of their money back, that type of thing. Federal loans tend to be a lot more affordable. The interest rate is a lot lower on them than on private loans. Okay. So anyway, that's the number two, right? Either identifying a source of public or private student loan.
Number three would be scholarships.
Yeah.
And grants. I mean, they kind of fall in the same, but scholarships and grants, those are ones that somebody, because of one factor or another, it could be academic, it could be athletic, it could be completely off the wall. And I'll get to that in a minute. But this is where you qualify for some kind of funding from a usually a private party because of some parameters that they have at stake, and they pay for your college as long as you fall into that and you're awarded that scholarship. Not everybody is awarded scholarships. Academics, you have to have a certain GPA, and a lot of times you have to be in a certain school, depending on, again, where that scholarship is coming from. So either School of Business or you're specifically majoring in this subject. You can also do athletics. So you're going to be a part of a team in some capacity. So they're going to pay for you to go to school as long as you're on that team. The one that, and this is, I said, the off the wall ones, this is kind of where I feel there's not a whole lot of emphasis, and there should be, and I can't remember the last numbers, but it's always in the billions of granted scholarships every year that they were never applied for, so they were never given. And it's really important for the listeners and any student, especially if you're in high school. If you're a senior in high school, please pay attention to this. You need to go and look up as many scholarships as you possibly can, because it's a numbers game. The more you apply, then you're not going to get every one of them. You're not going to get 95% of them. But if you get 5% of them and you apply for 100 of them, that's still 5 scholarships.
Well, let's break it down a little bit further for him because,
Yeah.
like for myself, when I was first going to college, I had no understanding of any of this stuff, particularly the whole scholarship thing. So what are scholarships and where do they come from? Like, you and I identified that there are sometimes public scholarships.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Those normally come from the state government, right? The state in which you live, right? And they oftentimes apply just to state institutions, but sometimes they'll give you the equivalent money to go to a private institution. It depends upon your state. Okay.
Yep. I can only speak from Georgia. I don't know. Did Carolina have one? Georgia has the Hope.
South Carolina had one called,
Okay.
honestly, I forget what it's called now. It's Life, I think, the Life Scholarship.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I know different states have different ones.
And they do tiers of them. Like if you're in the top 5-10% of your class and you have over a certain GPA, it's more money. If you are, in the top like 50% or something like that, it's a different. So lots of states have different tiers and things like that. And the idea is just to use state tax funds or revenues from other sources like lottery and things like that to pay for a substantial number of promising students. And they deem you as being promising because you performed well academically in high school, right? From 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grade type scenario.
With the understanding that you're going to go to college in the same state.
Right.
So like I couldn't have gone outside of Georgia and still got Hope.
Yeah, the money is used inside the state. It's an economic development fund, that type of thing. So to start with, guys out there, if you're looking for scholarships, you look first to your state scholarships to see. And don't get me wrong, I understand if you're first generation going to college. I was an exception. My brother and I were an exception because my parents, even though they didn't go to college, they understood the value of education in terms of career path. They didn't understand the value of education in terms of personal development, general worldly understanding, expanding your horizons like that. They saw it as strictly a functional thing that would help you get another job. But nonetheless, they put a ton of emphasis on that. So they made us do well in school, right? They put so much pressure on us to perform well, and they tied benefits to it being, well, we'll let you go out and have fun and do things if you make good grades, right? We will support you in that way. And that was what incentivized me to make good grades. Lots of people who come from a background that doesn't have a lot of influence in terms of doing well in school and things like that. I mean, I was sitting in a McDonald's not a couple years ago, and I heard a father saying to his young child, I ain't need no school. I don't know why you need any school either. That type of thing. And you get that from a socioeconomic class that really just doesn't understand the value, not just financial, but also economic. And there's personal pride things about also you're going to go on and get this education. You think you're going to be better than me, that type of thing, So there's all this social, interplay, psychological elements that come into play. But that being said, most of the time, if you don't come from a background where education is valued, right, you're probably going to not perform as well in school because the emphasis isn't there, the support isn't there, that type of thing. So that may eliminate a lot of scholarships for you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I saw it over and over, right? I hate to say it, but the number one predictor, if you were to look at a child in a birthing ward, right, and bet on their financial success in the future, the number one indicator for their financial success will be the education level of their parents, right? I mean, so that being said, it's just something you have to overcome. Now, don't get me wrong, I've also seen it where people came from very poor academic backgrounds. There wasn't much support. There wasn't much emphasis on it. And they turned things around completely. And they became...
Yeah, they use that as a motivator.
Yeah, they became an amazing student, right? Yeah. Type thing. I was a really, really bad student all the way until I got to 9th grade. 8th grade, I was making D's. There was, there was a conversation as to whether, I should be held back type scenario. And then when ninth grade started, I just turned it around. I got motivated in a way, and it was a very painful year, but I learned how to study. I became self-motivated, and it came just at the perfect time. And because it did, I went from making very low grades to very high grades. And it was just, a mental change. But I was in a position where I could do it, right? Some people are so far behind they can't catch up. They can't do those things. So anyway, I know I digress a bit, but I just had to preface that out there in terms of scholarships, that academic scholarships you may not be qualified for. So we need to look at the other types of scholarships as well to see if you are qualified. So we've identified the state public ones. Those tend to be tied to grades, right? But AJ, what are some other types of scholarships? And we can go back and forth on this.
Yeah. So really quickly, you have the state public scholarships. And again, those are typically dependent on your grades. You also have, I know in the state of Georgia, we also have what's called the Pell Grant, which is based on income. So financially based. You also have private ones, like I said, that are based on various factors. So you can have, depending on what school you're going to go to, what type of degree you're going to go into, what kind of education you're going to get, like what are you planning on doing with your degree.
And who do those scholarships come from?
Usually they come from the employer of some capacity, the ones I'm thinking of.
Oh, okay.
So like the nurses. Mm-hmm. Nurses a lot of times will give one, assuming either they're going to get, they have some merit that they want to provide it on, or sometimes they do a reimbursement style too. But I know there's some out there I was looking at that if you're going to go into nursing, it was built upon somebody who was in the nursing field that set up a private one for nursing students. The ones that I really wanted to put an emphasis on, because it's the ones that when you're dealing with athletics, when you're dealing with academics, when you're dealing with, certain kind of degrees that you may not be going after, you may look at those scholarships and go, there's no way. I don't have the grades. I'm not on an athletics team. I'm not in the specific school. There are also scholarships simply for creativeness, simply for merit, simply for extracurriculars,
ethnic background, right?
Ethnic background. Like I, when I was in college, I think it was my first year of college, I actually got into scholarships to see what are out there. And I remember filling out an application for a scholarship simply on creativity. It was one question, and it said, if you had your choice of vanity license plate for your car, what would it say and why? And it was just whoever came up with the most creative, idea and submission got the money. And it was like $1,000 scholarship. And you add a couple of those up, man, you're getting a lot of money.
I saw some out there for, obviously there's like ones for like ethnic background and heritage and things like that. Mm-hmm. Like if you're from this country or whatever, there's all sorts. We gotta preface it with this. These scholarships are normally private, nonprofit, trust-based, nonprofit sector businesses, right? They just manage funds and make grants for things like research, education, things like that. And all they are doing is managing pools of money and awarding some of that money every year, usually the earnings from the corpus of it, right, to people. And so they create these scholarships that are based on things like, if you're interested in this topic, right, woodworking, there's a scholarship out there where you can apply for it and, get it. And you just have to search or, use Google. Google is your best friend. Type scenario.
There's actually apps out there now that will do it. You put in your qualifications, you put in your demographics and stuff, and it'll actually just list out all the possible ones that you fulfill their categories.
Right. But some of them don't make that list, right? Some of the potential scholarships. The one we kind of jumped over a little bit is lots of times your specific academic institution will create all of these types of scholarships. And what happens is donors, alumni usually, but sometimes just donors of the school want to donate money to the school, and they'll donate a portion to the general fund, right, for school operations. Some of them will donate it specifically to sports and things like that. But probably the number one area where people want to donate is scholarships. And it can be the general scholarship fund where the school sets up scholarships for people from certain backgrounds, from certain areas, for areas of interest that you want to study. Normally, again, they're somewhat tied to your academic performance in high school, but not very closely. Sometimes I had a suite mate in college who was flunking, but got one of the school's scholarships based upon the demographic area of the country he was from and what he was studying, right? You'll see that lots of times, like, so basically there's pots of money out there within the school that certain people are qualified for and others aren't. So you need to, one, not only investigate your state options, investigate your school options in that way. Some very fortunate people receive academic, athletic scholarships, right, where they are paid to be on a sports team. But there are not many of those, right? Your biggest schools have have the most, but they also recruit players from all over the world to fulfill them. So, AJ brought up one of the best points there about looking at all these private scholarship institutions. All right, so we've gone through two things, right? Cash, student loans, and scholarships. What's another one?
Really quickly, let's go through the last ones, and that is, in some capacity, you're working, whether you're working prior to or you're working after you graduate. So you can have the work-study plan. So work-study is the one where you work part-time at a business, and they pay you in some capacity, whether it be cash or they go straight to you paying off your college, and you have to fulfill some kind of obligation. And the other one is the after you graduate, which would be more of the employer reimbursement. So once you finished it, usually you get hired on somewhere and they say, if you work here for X amount of years, we will pay off your student loans. This is a little off topic, and I know we're getting a little long on this. I don't want to take too much time, but I will say this, and we don't have an episode on this coming up, but I always find it interesting. If an employer is willing to reimburse for your college, your college education, so they're going to reimburse you or they're going to pay for your student loans, and you planned ahead or you worked hard and you got the scholarships or you didn't have to have student loans, that's also a mechanism for negotiating. If they were willing to pay for your student loans and you didn't have student loans, then they should be willing to pay you a little bit extra in your salary, because they're going to pay for it anyway. And so that's also just another kind of benefit if you don't have to go through the student loans, is you can actually use that a little bit as leverage to maybe get a little bit higher pay. I know some people that have went through that and actually used that successfully.
So I want to piggyback on that just a little bit, right? If you can identify ahead of time the field or area that you want to go into, there are a number of ways, specifically some through the government and some through private business. So you just identified private business, right? That, okay, you work for a company, they will reimburse, they will pay for your classes as you go if you're working for them while you're in school, right? Or you can get student loan reimbursement afterwards, okay? One of the biggest ways is through the government, right? So number one, there is the military. So, I served in the military. There was an option in college. I could have gone into ROTC, which is the Reserve Officer Training Corps. Basically, you take a few military science classes, you do some kind of weekend type drill training, and then some summertime training while you're in college, and you receive a commission while you're in college. They pay for your college throughout, and afterwards you commission in the military branch that you did ROTC for, right? So it's great. You have a job afterwards, right? Some great experience in whatever field. And there are tons of fields in the military. Not all of them are infantry or artillery or armor or something like that, right? There's human resources, there's finance, there's
law.
There's just so many fields you can go into in these organizations. And so that being said, that's a great option, not just the military, but there are other government options like the Peace Corps that will offer some level of reimbursement. There is Teach for America, if you're willing to, after graduation, get your teaching certificate and go serve in underserved educational areas. And I'm a big proponent of that because, to get some level of relief from your student loans for just going and getting an amazing couple, 2, 3, 4 year experience teaching in an area, it helps you understand people better. It helps you understand where they came from. It teaches you a whole skill set. If you've never taught, right? Kids that oftentimes have, don't have the structure that you might have come up with. They have disciplinary issues. They have lack of resource issues. They may not have a positive home environment at all. These are oftentimes the areas where this is a commonality among the students in the areas where they send you to teach in exchange for that. There are medical services ones if you're going into medicine, things like that. So all of these things are possible. Also, there's one that's a big deal right now that you hear a lot of talk about is the public service loan forgiveness program that the government does. If you've got federal student loans and you work in a qualified nonprofit or government entity for a certain number of years and you make payments towards your student loans at a certain rate, it's usually income contingent, right? But some of that's changing right now. But you make income contingent student loans for a period of time, the government will, once you reach, usually it's a 10-year threshold, right? The 10-year mark will relieve your obligation from those student loans. So you owe $50,000 and you're making, 35, 45, 55, whatever, thousand a year. They'll take some calculation and say, this is the amount of student loan payment you need to make for the public interest or public service loan forgiveness. After 10 years of making those payments, your student loans, again, are wiped away. That's a huge benefit to people because they're working in a field where they might be able to go make more money elsewhere, or they may just work in a field that doesn't provide that public service or that public good. So that's, something for people who work in government, people work in nonprofit, things like that they can take advantage of. So I know it takes a little more determination.
Can I add two more?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because you're talking about work study from the government side, you can also look at it from the state side, and it is from the state side, but it's actually through the university, and that is your work study as a student. You can be an RA or a TA or a, what's the other one? I'm thinking of another one, but the research assistant, the teaching assistant. There's another one too.
Oh, that's RA is resident assistant.
Well, there's also research side where you can have for usually grad students.
That's a grad student thing, yeah.
So, but these are all things that you can do at some level of your college that will reduce or pay for your tuition.
We have students at our university, our college, that work and do things within the faculty offices, within the staff offices, and things like that. They have positions that subsidize their education. Right? Type thing. So, I guess what I was going to say, though, is there's the proactive side of trying to find scholarships and trying to find means and method to reduce the amount of money you would have to pay to go to college. If you do have to pay, there's student loans out there, but you want to try and keep those to a minimum. And then if you have a plan, you know where you're going, there are means or methods after college to have that, your student loan debt reduced or forgiven, right? Yeah. Or paid by somebody else is what I'm saying, I suppose, by your employer, by the government, right? Type scenario. And all of this allows you to go on to that higher level of education. A lot of people are huge proponents of just eliminating the cost of public colleges and universities, and that's a great thing. The only downside that we've seen with that, and this is something that's, continued a trend, that if you let everybody in, right, if you don't have any barrier, nobody's got skin in the game, it becomes more like the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th grade, right? Yeah. And the academic standards tend to suffer, right? Because, the collective academic level of achievement and things like that, the seriousness and dedication of the student tends to go down, right? But, in that it really, the effect is that it creates a hierarchy of schools, right? You have the schools where they perceive it as, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th grade, that these students are somehow going to be less prepared because they've been exposed to a lower level of academic rigor, right? And testing and assessment and exposure throughout. And unfortunately, that's true. The research shows that it is true, right? So, you tend to see employers start to gravitate towards colleges that have a higher reputation or ranking, right? That type of thing. So once again, that goes into your strategy determination of what school is right for you and what you're hoping to get out of it, what you're prepared for. and what it's going to cost you and what the return on investment is going to be, both financially and personal development. I'll call that socially.
Well, this has been a really interesting topic. I was not anticipating us to spend this much time. I thought this was going to be just a pretty quick one, but I think it does go so far into, a complicated area that students need to consider when they're choosing a college, when they're deciding to go to college, and while they're in college, because there's a lot of options. There's also a lot of things factors you have to consider as well. Do you have anything to say before we head out?
No, just remind everybody. Well, I'm going to give actually a tip on this one.
Hey, look at there.
There is so many ways for you to go to college, right? In terms of the financial hurdles and obligations and things like that. It is available to everyone, even if you did not have the best grades in high school, even if you do not have the financial resources or the support, that type of thing. There is a program, or there are programs out there that will fit you well, that will foster whatever you hope to be, right? And there is a means or method to either pay for it through, in advance, get loans for it, and then ultimately to have those loans retroactively paid, or just to make certain you're earning enough money afterwards that it's not a substantial hindrance in your life to pay for those things. So those are my closing points there. But I do want to remind everybody, you got to hit us up on that on our website, Reschool'd. That's Reschool'd with the D, not an ED, .com. Just drop us a line. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know what you want to hear about, and we will talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And to kind of piggyback on what Jason said, there's a chair for everyone. It's just a matter of, being dedicated and putting the time in to succeed in it, because like I said, like we've said before, our college, it's an access institute. There's no minimums in terms of grades in order to be a student at our college. So, and there are plenty of colleges out there, and they give really good education, academic education. So, if you're interested in pursuing an education, all you got to do is take the time to do some research and find out which best fits you. So I think you very well said on that last piece. Well, that's the show. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, we hope to see you there. Goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.